Jim and Kathy are in Tennessee.
Oh, Tennessee?
Yep, for the graduation of their granddaughter.
That's right.
All right, so we are on chapter 48. In chapter 47, we hear about how the children of Israel are blessed in their afflictions, and even in the midst of starvation and dearth, we see that God through Pharaoh blesses them and gives them the best land, while the rest of Egypt is actually selling their land to Pharaoh. And yet, even at the same time as this, we see that Joseph is a wise and magnanimous ruler, and he does things not only for the good of Pharaoh, but also for the good of the people of the land. In chapter 48, this is a very important chapter because it deals with the tribes of Joseph. As you know from your list of the 12 tribes of Israel, there is no tribe of Joseph. And that is explained here in chapter 48. So, having spent 17 years in the land of Egypt, Jacob is now dying. He is sick. He is 147 years old. And he is going to bless Joseph, or rather his two sons, his posterity, before he dies. So let us read verses 1 through 4.
Sometime later, Joseph was told, "Your father is ill." So he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, along with him. When Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to you," Israel rallied his strength and sat up on the bed. Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me and said to me, 'I'm going to make you fruitful, and I will increase your numbers. I will make you a community of peoples, and I will give this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants after you.'"
All right. So, here we see that Joseph, when he hears that his father is sick, he takes time off of work because obviously he is very, very busy ruling the kingdom and being a father to Pharaoh. And he takes his two sons to visit his ailing father, his feeble father. How old do you think Manasseh and Ephraim are at this point? Yeah, they'd be in their 20s, between 18 and 20 some years old, because remember, Joseph has spent 17 years in the land of Egypt, and his sons were born before then. So here we can see that they're not young men, at least how we count young men. They are coming into the prime of their lives. Okay? So, Jacob is told that his son is coming to him. And then we see what? What do we see?
It's a surge of strength.
Yes, and what name is used? Why do you think that's important?
That's the nation they were going to become. It was named after Israel.
Yes, and this was the name that God gave to him, right? This is the name by which Jacob was blessed, and this is the name of the blessing giver. He is rallying himself now, not just to see his son, not just out of sentimentalism, but so that he can pass on the temporal blessings to his grandsons, who are really going to become his sons. We see that the messianic promise is going to go to Judah. However, the promise of the firstborn, that is the double portion, is not going to go to Judah. That promise is going to go to Joseph, which is why he is going to have two tribes instead of one tribe. The rest of the sons have kind of forfeited their inheritance this way. And Joseph, as the pious son, is going to receive the temporal blessings of the messianic promise. So, Israel strengthens himself for this blessing. And he says God Almighty, and that name for God Almighty is El Shaddai. As I've said before, I don't think God Almighty is the best translation for this. As you know, in Hebrew, shad is a breast, so it can mean the many-breasted one or the all-sufficient one. This isn't talking about God having, it's a figurative breast, of course. We're not talking about God being a woman here, but the breast is comforting and it provides nourishment for children. And in the same way, that is what God does for his children. It can also mean the strong one, too. So, I think, in a way, El Shaddai, if they would just translate it El Shaddai, it might be better, rather than translating it as God Almighty. And then having in the footnotes kind of an explanation of what El Shaddai can mean, and sort of the multifaceted aspects of it. Because that's what some of these words are in Hebrew. They are like a diamond. Right? They're many faceted. And sometimes when we read translations, it's like going from it's like going from HD flat screen TV to an old black and white TV that you had when you were kids with the fuzzy picture, right? You can still see the picture, but it's not as good. So, he says that God appeared to him at Luz, and what is Luz? Where is Luz? What's the other name for it? Where did God appear to Jacob? Called it by what?
Bethel.
Bethel. Luz is another name for Bethel. It's the old name for Bethel. Now, when the children of Israel come into the land, they're going to rename these places. Just like Jerusalem used to be Salem, and then when it was ruled by the Jebusites, it was known by another name, until David conquered it. So names do change. It's kind of like Iowa Falls. What was the name of Iowa Falls before it became Iowa Falls?
River City, I don't know.
I believe it was Roxylvania. So yeah, that was,
Yeah, and how do you know that?
because I know a lot. Well, it had to do with the railroad.
And humble, too.
And humble, yeah.
Well, it's not bragging. Yeah, it's not bragging if it's true.
It said humble.
So, it's, anyways. So, names change. And in fact, you bring with you, we even see this we even see this in the United States. What do they keep the Native American names for places? No, they rename them. You've got New York, which used to be
New Amsterdam.
New Amsterdam, and before that, it used to be the capital of New Sweden, before the Dutch took it over. So, and it's called New York because there's a town, because there's a York, right? So, we see that names do change, and they've even changed in our own country. So,
Anytime they came over from Europe, a lot of times they changed it.
right. And so that's why in the book of Genesis, it'll kind of go back between the old name and the new name. The old name, in order to kind of remain historical, but the new name, so that way people know what you're talking about. Because if I said I'm going to Roxylvania, none of you guys would know what I'm talking about. Or if I said I'm flying to New Amsterdam, a few of you guys might laugh at the joke, but not very many of you. So that's why they keep going back and forth between the old names and the new names. So that way, the people, and this is part of the historicity of it all. So that way you know where these things are happening. Where did God appear to Jacob? Bethel. It used to be called Luz. And you can actually go and visit these spots. You can see how God works through history. And so that's one of the beautiful things about using these different names and then correlating them together. So that way you can see where these things happened and that you can even go and visit these things to this day. We see in verse 4 that he is going to make them fruitful and multiply them and make a multitude of people. That was the physical blessing, the temporal blessing that God was going to give to the nation of Israel. And it is distinct, but not separate from the Messianic promise. We have to distinguish things, but not separate them. Right? We have a medical student here. And how important is it to distinguish arteries and veins, for example? That's very important, right? Now what happens if you separate the arteries from the veins? Then you die, right? So you have to distinguish things without separating them. Because all of these promises are distinct promises. And they should be distinct. Because if you don't distinguish them, then you're going to be like the crass, worldly Jews of Jesus' time who thought that the Messiah was going to be a conqueror, who was going to throw out the Romans and the like, and not be for all nations. But if you separate them, then some of these things become about, then you miss out on basically the many blessings of God. So, verse 5 through 6. We'll start there.
Now then, your 2 sons born to you in Egypt before I came to you here will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Any children born to you after them will be yours in the territory they inherit. They will be reckoned under the names of their brothers.
All right, so what is Israel doing here?
Are they choosing the future leaders?
In a sense, yes. What he's saying is your 2 sons, my grandsons, I'm adopting. They are mine. They are my firstborn, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Now, why bring up Reuben and Simeon? Well, what did Reuben do? Bad stuff, right? That excluded him from this, from being 2 tribes. And the same way with Simeon. Simeon killed a whole village in anger and malice. And so it also excludes him from this promise. And so to replace his own 2 firstborn children, this is what Jacob is doing. He's actually adopting Ephraim and Manasseh. They are going to be reckoned as his sons. And in this way, he is blessing Joseph. And that any children after these 2 will not be their own separate tribes, but they will belong to either Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay? So that's what he's doing here. He's saying, rather than there being a tribe of Joseph, and your sons being the heads of their respective families, the clans within the tribe, they are going to be 2 tribes. I'm giving you a double portion. That's what the firstborn would always get. He would get a double portion of his father's property. So, and that is being basically kind of divided between Ephraim and Manasseh. Verses 7 through... Yeah, we'll read verse 7.
As I was returning from Paddan to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan while we were still on the way, a little distance from Ephraim. So I buried her there beside the road to Ephraim, that is Bethlehem.
All right, so what he's doing here is he's taking the sons of Joseph, who was the firstborn of his second wife, his favorite wife, and he is blessing them. In this way, he is honoring their dead mother also. So those promises, which, at least according to the Mosaic Law, which isn't in effect yet, should have gone to either Reuben or Simeon. However, Joseph, in order to honor Rachel, who died on the way, he basically raises and exalts her sons out of his love for her and out of his love for Joseph. Verses 8 through 9.
When Israel saw the sons of Joseph, he asked, "Who are these?" "They are the sons God has given me here," Joseph said to his father. Then Israel said, "Bring them to me so I may bless them." Okay,
so Israel beholds Joseph's sons, and then he asks who they are. Is that, as a grandparent, how would you feel about that? Probably not the best. But think of the circumstances where they're being raised. Where does Jacob live? Goshen. Where does Joseph live? Yeah, Egypt, probably around Memphis, more than likely, or wherever the capital of the kingdom was at that time. Admittedly, my Egyptian history is not as solid as what it should be on this. But there was a difference here. A difference of distance and the like. Besides, what do you think is happening to Jacob's eyes? Yeah, he's going blind. And if you don't see these kids for a while, you don't know who they are hardly. So it would make sense that he doesn't recognize them. And he wants to bless them. And we see in verse 10, "Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. And he brought them near unto him, and he kissed them and embraced them, showing them love and affection." This should kind of remind you of Jacob's own ascension, because this is what his father Isaac did for him. It is amazing how we become more and more like our parents as we get older. And that these things that we thought were so stupid when we were young actually become very important to us as we get older. "And Israel said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath shown me also thy seed." Think of that. Think of the joy that this is bringing him. He thought his son was dead, and he would not see his son this side of heaven. But God has not only brought Joseph back to him, but he is also able to see his grandchildren by Joseph. What a blessing. It is true that the righteous will see their children's children to the third and fourth generation. "And Joseph brought them out from between his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand towards Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him." So they are, here Joseph is facing Israel, so your right hand is going to be your going to be Israel's left, right? That's how left and right works. We learned that in kindergarten. Why is the position important?
Usually the right hand was like the head.
Yes.
Most important.
Well, we still use these phrases today, right?
The right-hand man.
Right-hand man. And we also hate lefties because when you're a bad dancer, it's not like you have two right feet.
You have two left.
And you're never out in right field when you're crazy. So, and ambidextrous literally means having two right hands. You know what not being good at anything with either hand is? Being ambisinister, which means having two left hands. So, literally. So, to sit at the right hand of someone is to sit at a place of prominence. That's why when it says in the scriptures that Jesus ascended to the right hand of God, doesn't mean he's literally sitting on a big right hand somewhere in heaven. It means that he is sitting at the place of all prominence and power and authority. And so why is Manasseh on the right hand? Why is Manasseh on the right hand and Ephraim on the left, on Israel's left hand?
Firstborn.
Right. So, Manasseh is the oldest, and so he should get the bigger blessing. However, that's not going to happen. Verse 14, and Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. So what does he do? He crosses his hands. And he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day, the angel, and remember here, this is talking about the pre-incarnate Son of God, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. What a blessing that he is praying that his name Israel is on them. And this is why when the 10 tribes break away, what are they called? In the days of Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. Israel, right? And what's the southern kingdom called? Judah. And so they actually bear the name of Israel. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused, and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he shall also be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. So why does Israel prefer the younger to the older?
Divine intervention.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe because that's what happened in his family.
Yes, that is exactly what happened in his family. God preferred Jacob to Esau. In the same way, what Isaac is doing here is he is teaching that God prefers the younger to the older. He prefers the weak to the strong. He prefers the one who is nothing to the one who is wealthy. It is a reversal of all the things that make sense in this world to us. Because we think that being the firstborn should entitle us to something. We believe that the smart people should get more things. And this is how we act in this world. But what Jesus does throughout the Bible is he reverses that. The poor are actually exalted, and the rich are sent empty away. The proud are cast down from their thrones, and the lowly are exalted. That's what happens. And it happens time and time again in the Bible. Not because the poor and the lowly have anything to recommend themselves to God. That's not it at all. But God here is showing that it doesn't depend upon your birth order. It doesn't depend upon your merit, but it depends upon the God who calls. That is where our value lies. That is why God chooses Israel, that is, the nation Israel, out of all the others. Did he choose them because they were the most numerous? No, they were the least numerous nation on earth. Did he choose them because they were good? Were they good? No, they were not good at all. But God chose them because he loved them. He chose them in order to make his own name great. And in the same way, why does God choose us? Did he choose you because you have any merit? No, he chooses you because he loves you. He cares for you. That is the way God works. So here we see that Ephraim, the younger, is going to surpass Manasseh, the older. Now it's interesting to see in this chart here, this is a great book, the ESV Concise Bible Atlas. If you don't have this, you should get it because it really lays out the maps very well. And on this page here, you can see how the 12 tribes of Israel were, how the land was allotted to them during the time of Joshua. And we see Ephraim is right here in the middle, and Manasseh actually has two very big sections of land here. East Manasseh, which is east of the Jordan, and West Manasseh, which is in the land of Israel proper. And so I think sometimes it's very helpful for us to look at that and see how God blesses them. And Ephraim is always going to be first. He's always going to be before Manasseh in all things. He's placed first in the list of generations. He's placed first in the list of descendants. He's placed first in the allotting of tribal territories. He's placed first when determining the tribal divisions. He's placed first among the tribal chieftains. He's placed first among the judges because Joshua was from Ephraim and Gideon was from Manasseh. He is placed first among the kings because Jeroboam was from Ephraim, the ruler of the 10 tribes when they broke away from the house of David. And Jehu was from Manasseh. He is put first in blessing because Israel shall say, God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. He is placed first in regard to the birthright, which is quite an amazing thing. So in most things, Ephraim is placed first. And in fact, we see that they are a great and mighty tribe in the book of Judges. We read about them again and again. But unfortunately, what happens when God pours out his temporal blessings on us? What often happens to us? Yes, and faith is replaced with
Greed for more.
not just greed, but pride. And that's exactly what happens to the Ephraimites. They become cocksure and prideful. And during the wars against the Ammonites, they come to Japheth and say to him, well, why didn't you call us up? And they're very brusque and very thinking that they deserve a bigger piece of the pie. And Japheth is like, well, I called you guys and you guys never came. So God delivered them into my hands. Same thing happened with Gideon too. But Gideon was a much nicer guy. And so he kind of flatters them and kind of avoids. But Japheth isn't. He's not a very tactful diplomat. And so he just says it like it is. And so what happens is this is where we get the word shibboleth. What's a shibboleth? A shibboleth is used usually in our circles today. It's a watchword or a byword, a secret word, so that you can recognize who's who. Well, that comes from the book of Judges, because when Japheth beats the Ephraimites, because the Ephraimites actually go to war with Japheth and his army in Gilead, and the Ephraimites lose because they're in the wrong, and God doesn't bless them. And what Japheth does is when the Ephraimites try to cross the Jordan to get back home, he has them say a word. Shibboleth. Well, the Ephraimites can't say it. They can't say shh. They can only say Sibboleth. It'd be like trying to get a Texan to speak like a Yankee. Well, what happens when they can't say Shibboleth? They die. Right? That was the judgment that Japheth put on them, because they, in pride and arrogance, attacked God's army. Japheth defeated them and then put them to the sword when they sought to flee. And so here we see that the tribe of Ephraim is nothing like their great-grandsire. Joseph was always trying to make peace. Joseph was forgiving. His descendants are arrogant and brash, and they bring this destruction upon themselves. So this is why it is very, very important for us to not get caught up in the physical blessings, the temporal blessings which God gives to us. Because oftentimes we take more joy in those than in the spiritual blessings which God gives to us. And then we become prideful, we become cocksure, and then oftentimes God will bring strict judgment upon us. And so it is very, very important for us to continue to examine ourselves and to remember who is the one who is giving the good gifts. So that's why it's very important for you to continue to look at Israelite history to see how these things play out. Because the tribe of Ephraim and the tribe of Manasseh eventually stray from the Lord. And all of their temporal blessings are brought to naught. They are exiled. They are mixed in with a foreign people. They begin to worship false gods, and they eventually become the Samaritans. And what a low ending for these children who were so highly blessed by their patriarch. But that's the thing. They took more stock in themselves than in the one who gives virility, than the one who gives these wonderful temporal gifts. And Israel said unto Joseph, Behold, I die, but God shall be with you, and bring you again unto the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. So to Joseph's tribes, he is going to give one extra portion of land. This is going to be the land of Shechem. Now, and here Israel is talking prophetically. He, that is the nation of Israel, when they conquer the land and take it away from the Amorites, is going to give to Joseph one extra piece of land. And I believe this land goes to Joseph, or not Joseph, but Joshua, and then to Caleb. who is also an Ephraimite. And that ends chapter 48. Any questions? All right. Well, it sounds like people are